silver-gray Bentley sat silently in the middle of a deserted country road, like a noble beast lost in the wild. Above, the sun blazed fiercely. Below, the heat shimmered off the asphalt as if the ground were about to crack open. Inside the car, Mr. Elliot Hawthorne, a white man nearing 80, neatly trimmed silver hair, crisp tailored white shirt, sat quietly behind the wheel. The sunlight reflected off the windshield, lighting up his deep, dry, weathered eyes. He was a renowned millionaire in the financial world, a man who once led deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, respected even on Wall Street for his sharp vision and a heart as cold as steel. But today, he was stuck. A rusty nail, hidden somewhere among potholes, had blown out the right rear tire. No assistant was with him, no phone signal, no passerby in sight. He was stranded in an unfamiliar countryside so obscure even its name had faded from his memory. He unbuttoned his cuffs, rolled up his sleeves, turned on the air conditioning, but sweat still poured like a stream, beating on his forehead and soaking his Italian silk collar. "Perfect," he muttered, voice dry and tinged with bitter helplessness. A life of counting every cent, and now beaten by a 25-cent nail. He meant to step out and open the trunk, but then realized something. He had never changed a tire in his life. Every problem in his life had always been handled by someone else. One phone call was all it ever took. But now there was no signal, no assistant, no private helicopter, only pride, age, and a useless luxury car. Suddenly, from afar came the crunching sound of gravel. Elliot squinted through the windshield. Through the shimmering waves of heat, a figure was approaching. The person walked slowly but steadily, a faded backpack swinging behind, a baseball cap hiding half his face. It was a black boy, perhaps no more than 14. An oversized t-shirt, old shorts, worn sneakers with frayed heels. His hands were dusty. His eyes shone with an unusual light, not fearful, not curious, but remarkably calm. He stopped a few steps from the car and looked at Elliot in the tilted luxury vehicle. "Flat tire?" the boy asked. His accent was southern, but his voice was clear and composed. Elliot froze. It had probably been 20 years since a child last spoke to him. He looked the boy over from head to toe. His facial muscles tightened between conflicting emotions: caution, suspicion, and a hint of shame. "Yes, tire's blown, and I don't know what to do." The boy nodded, approached the car without asking for permission. Without another question, he knelt beside the damaged tire, examined it briefly, then said, "You got a spare tire?" Elliot stood frozen like a statue, then pointed to the trunk. "Back there. I think there's a toolkit." The boy opened the trunk, pulled out the spare, the jack, the lug wrench, working as if he'd done this 100 times. "What's your name?" Elliot asked, his voice suddenly softer. "I'm Malik. I live nearby, with my grandma, walking home from school." "What grade are you in?" "8th. I like mechanics. Whenever grandma's car breaks down, I fix it myself." Malik worked with astonishing professionalism. He didn't talk much. He didn't boast. 15 minutes later, he stepped back, wiped his hands on his shorts, sweat pouring down his face, but he smiled. "All done, sir. You're good to go." Elliot had never seen anyone, especially not a child, work with such focus, calmness, and dignity. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't expect anything. Quietly, Elliot opened his wallet and pulled out a $100 bill, a reflex ingrained in him whenever he needed to solve a problem. "Take it. Get yourself something to eat. Consider it payment." Malik stepped back. The slight frown on his brow made Elliot pause. "I don't need money, sir. I just saw someone in trouble and wanted to help." Elliot was taken aback. In his world, people helped each other for something: money, connections, fame. But this boy, Malik smiled, then walked away. After a few steps, he turned back and said, "Drive safe, okay?" Elliot stood there, still holding the unfolded bill. A light breeze passed, making his shirt hem flutter. Inside his aging chest, something shifted. He watched the boy's back disappear behind a line of eucalyptus trees. For some reason, his heart pounded, as if he had just realized something very important, very familiar. That face, those eyes. Why did they seem so familiar, like someone from long, long ago? That evening, the warm yellow light from a chandelier cast long shadows across the mahogany desk in the grand study of the Hawthorne estate. Portraits of stern-looking ancestors stared down from the walls as if judging the present through cold, painted eyes. In that chilling silence sat Elliot Hawthorne, a man who had once possessed everything from power to wealth, now quietly confronting something he had avoided his entire life: the past. To his left sat a glass of untouched cognac. To his right lay an old photo, its edges yellowed with time. Elliot picked it up and brought it closer to the desk lamp. In the picture, a young black woman with natural curly hair was holding a baby boy in her arms. She smiled, a radiant smile full of hope, warmth, and confidence. The baby, about 1 year old, looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. Elliot whispered to himself, Aaliyah. That name he hadn't dared say it aloud in over 30 years. Back then, when Daniel, Elliot's only son, brought Aaliyah home to introduce her, Elliot had made no attempt to hide his disapproval. A black woman from a poor neighborhood in the South, daring to step into the doors of the prestigious Hawthorne family. You're playing with your future, Daniel. She doesn't belong in your world. She is my world, Dad. After their final argument, Daniel left home. Elliot cut him off financially, erased his name from the will, ignoring the pleas from Daniel's mother, the only woman who had ever softened his hardened nature. A car accident. Daniel died. Aaliyah vanished. No one in the Hawthorne family ever mentioned it again. Elliot thought he had erased it completely, until today. The next morning, Elliot lay on his large bed, unable to sleep. His eyes were bloodshot after a sleepless night. One thought dominated his mind. Malik, the boy from yesterday. Those eyes, the way he had refused money, so reminiscent of Daniel's stubborn decency. Narrow shoulders but towering dignity. It couldn't be just coincidence. He got up suddenly, changed into a light-colored shirt, skipped his usual lavish breakfast, and drove himself out of the mansion, something he hadn't done in over a decade. Driving toward Malik's neighborhood, Elliot passed glass buildings reflecting the pale morning sky. He drove through streets he had once ordered to be developed, but had never walked. The closer he got to where Malik lived, the narrower the road became. Cracked pavement, tangled electrical wires like spider webs overhead. He stopped in front of an old wooden house with a rusted tin roof. On the porch, Malik was crouched over, fixing a rusty mini bike. One hand on the frame, the other tightening a wrench. Elliot stepped out of the car. No expensive suit this time, no sunglasses, no bodyguards, just an old man with damp eyes. Malik looked up, surprised. You came back? Did the car break down again? Elliot walked closer, trying to smile. No, the car's fine, but something inside me is not. Malik frowned, putting down the wrench and he's standing with his hands on his hips. What do you mean? You helped me yesterday, pulled me out of an embarrassing moment. I can't sit still. I need to know who you are. Malik grew wary. A figure stepped out of the house. It was Malik's grandmother, about 60, her face weathered, but her eyes sharp and alert. She crossed her arms and looked Elliot up and down. What do you want from my grandson? Elliot lowered his head, his voice trembling. For the first time in years, he felt small before a woman of humble means. I'm sorry, I didn't come to demand anything. I am Elliot Hawthorne. The air seemed to freeze. The old woman paused, her eyes widened. Malik blinked, repeating the name under his breath. Elliot took a deep breath. I once had a son named Daniel. Over 30 years ago, he fell in love with a black woman. Her name was Aaliyah. The elderly woman trembled, nearly dropping the teacup in her hand. Malik stammered, Aaliyah is my mother. The wind stilled. Leaves fell. Elliot's heart felt as though it burst in his chest. He whispered, eyes stinging, Then you're Daniel's son? My grandson? Malik didn't answer immediately. He looked at his grandmother. She placed a hand on his shoulder and nodded gently, confirming a truth Malik had never truly known. Malik was indeed blood of the Hawthorne line. At 9 a.m., inside the small house tucked in a working-class neighborhood, sunlight streamed through a dusty window, illuminating the silver hair of Elliot Hawthorne, the once celebrated tycoon known as the real estate king of the East Coast. But now the gleam in his eyes held no pride. Instead, they were heavy with weariness and deep remorse. Sitting across from him was Malik, the 14-year-old boy who had helped him change a tire just the day before. Malik sat with a straight back, his eyes cautious, as if expecting everything in front of him to shatter with a single blink. Beside him sat a woman in her 60s, slender in figure, sharp-eyed with a quiet depth. Rosa, Malik's grandmother, and the last living keeper of memories about his mother, Aaliyah. Elliot spoke with a low, slightly trembling voice. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced, but I couldn't wait another day." Rosa took a sip of tea, her voice hoarse. "Almost 30 years have passed. You certainly took your time." The room fell silent. Malik glanced at Rosa, then back at Elliot. "So, how long have you known you're my grandfather?" Elliot looked deeply into the boy's eyes. He took a long breath, as if preparing to rip open sealed layers of memory. Back in 1994, Elliot stood before the desk in his vast mansion, his hands shaking as he held the last letter from Daniel, his only son. "Dad, I know you'll be angry. You'll be disappointed, but I can't keep pretending. I love Aaliyah, and I choose her, not to go against you, but because I want to live truthfully. If one day I'm no longer here, please find Malik. I believe that boy will make you prouder than I ever did." A tear fell onto the paper, but instead of finding his grandson, Elliot tore up the letter. Out of pride, out of pain, and because he didn't believe that a love outside his race could ever lead to happiness. Back in the present, Elliot said, "I've known about you for almost 2 years. An unknown lawyer sent me a copy of that letter from your mother's belongings. But it took me 2 years to gather the courage to come here." Malik narrowed his eyes, his voice colder. "Because you were too busy counting money? Or too busy forgetting you had a grandson?" The words cut like a knife, not sharp, but deep. Elliot bowed his head. Rosa spoke calmly. "Aaliyah once stood in front of your estate gates, but when she saw you on television declaring you'd turn African-American neighborhoods into luxury resorts, she turned away." Without a word, the room fell silent again. The ticking clock echoed steadily, as if reminding them all of lost time. Inside Malik's heart were hardened scars from childhood taunts. "Bastard! With your skin color, you'll never be more than a laborer." He had never expected to meet his grandfather, let alone find out he was a white billionaire with luxury cars, stocks, and million-dollar galas. Yet here he was, the man himself, sitting in his home, asking to begin again. Something in Malik wanted to believe, but he didn't know if it could be real. Malik asked, "So what do you want now? To claim me? Put your name on a paper? Bring me to your mansion? Or launch some Malik Foundation scholarship?" Elliot shook his head, and for the first time a fire lit up in his eyes. "I want to be your grandfather, not on paper, not in public, but for real, day by day." Malik was silent. Elliot continued, his voice rough. "If you refuse, I won't blame you. But if you agree, I want us to start again, somewhere in the middle. Learn to forgive and understand each other." Malik pressed his lips together. Rosa placed a hand on his shoulder. "Forgiveness is not a gift you give to others. It's a release you give to yourself, Malik." That afternoon, the two of them took a walk in the park near the house. A light breeze rustled the leaves. Children laughed in the distance. Elliot and Malik walked slowly side by side. Malik said, "My mom used to say, sometimes a loaf of bread handed to you sincerely is worth more than a cold, empty mansion." Elliot smiled gently. "Then let me start with a loaf of bread." They both laughed, not perfectly in sync, not fully, but it was Malik's first laugh during the entire meeting. That evening, as Elliot left, Malik stood by the door, watching him go. In his hands was the warm loaf of bread his grandfather had bought for him from a roadside bakery. Rosa quietly stepped out beside him. "What are you thinking?" Malik replied in a low voice. "I think maybe a part of me always wanted a grandfather like that, even if it's late." Rosa smiled for the first time that day, truly softly. Saturday night at the Hawthorne estate, a black SUV glided through the ornate wrought iron gates, rolling down a stone-paved path lined with neatly trimmed trees bathed in golden light, like a scene from a vintage film. Malik sat in the back seat, wearing a perfectly tailored suit. His face was slightly tense, not from fear, but because he had never stepped into a world like this, a world where everything was gilded, yet people's hearts might not be. Beside him, Rosa, the woman who had raised him, quietly looked out the window. Her petite figure seemed to fade into the extravagance of this place. Rosa said gently, "You have the right to be anywhere, even where others don't want you to be." Malik nodded slightly. His heart pounded. The heavy wooden doors opened, revealing a grand hall lit by dazzling crystal chandeliers. Everything here screamed opulence. Polished marble floors, red velvet walls, classical paintings, Italian sculptures, and clusters of people standing with champagne flutes, smiling with their mouths while judging with their eyes. Elliot Hawthorne, head of the family, stepped forward, smiling with pride but unable to hide his emotion. He opened his arms, welcoming Malik as if reclaiming a piece of his soul. Elliot said warmly, "My grandson has finally come home." For a brief moment, the music stopped. The entire ballroom seemed to freeze. All eyes turned to Malik, a black boy standing among a sea of white guests in an expensive suit. A well-dressed woman whispered behind a lace fan, "Is that really his blood grandson? No way. This will mess up the inheritance." Heels clicked across the floor. A woman in a sleek black dress with her hair in a tight bun and a face as sharp as cut glass stepped forward. It was Margaret Hawthorne, Elliot's ex-wife, Daniel's stepmother, and Malik's legal grandmother. Margaret smiled thinly, like a blade. "Elliot, you always did love surprises, but bringing a boy like that to a family gathering, is that appropriate?" Malik stood beside Elliot, feeling the blood pulse in the older man's clenched hand. Elliot still smiled, but his tone turned firm. People only feel threatened when the values they hide are reflected back by kindness. Margaret hesitated, and the crowd murmured. Malik was seated at a table with other teenagers, all from elite families, lawyers, judges, bankers, politicians, but not a single one looked at him as an equal. A blonde girl glanced at him and smiled sweetly. "Your suit's nice. Must be sponsored by Grandpa the Billionaire, huh?" A boy leaned in and whispered, "I thought you were the new waiter." Malik didn't respond. He sipped his water, his gaze steady and proud. "I'm Malik. I'm Hawthorne blood. I don't need you to believe it. I've endured more than this shallow dinner party." Leaving the table, Malik wandered through the old hallway and stepped into the library, the room Elliot once called the only place where the family's soul still lives. At the end of the hall, dim light fell on a dust-covered portrait. Malik slowly wiped away the cobwebs. It was his father, Daniel Hawthorne, holding a dark-skinned baby in his arms. Beneath the frame, faded by time, were the words, "Daniel and Malik, 2009. Malik froze. He had never seen this photo before, but deep in his heart, he knew it was him. Why was this portrait hidden? Who tried to erase my existence from this place? Suddenly, a cold voice pierced the air from behind. "You know, blood doesn't make you a Hawthorne. Power does." Malik turned. A tall young man with auburn hair and eyes full of calculation stepped out of the shadows. It was Preston, Margaret's son, and the official heir to the family. Preston spoke, through clenched teeth. "You think just because he accepted you, you'll get the money? Wrong. You're a glitch in the system." Malik stood his ground. "I didn't come to steal. I came to understand why I was abandoned." Preston stepped closer and whispered, "Good. Because the answers you're about to find will make you wish you never showed up." Across the ballroom, Elliot was raising a toast with a group of advisors. He had no idea that behind him, Margaret was whispering to the family lawyer, slipping him a folder. "Find every legal loophole. He cannot be allowed to take what belongs to Preston." The lawyer looked hesitant. Margaret added coldly, "And if we must?" "I'm ready to play dirty." Malik lay awake in the luxurious guest room of the Hawthorne estate. The silk curtains fluttered softly in the breeze slipping through the glass window, creating a whispering sound like a ghost retelling old tales. The room felt too foreign, too quiet, too empty. Despite the warm lighting and the soft bedding, Malik felt a chill down his spine. It wasn't the air conditioning, it was instinct, a feeling that something was watching him from every crack in the wall, every hanging portrait. And then, like a slow-motion film, a strange dream unfolded. Malik found himself standing in a forest, shrouded in mist, the leaves wet with night dew. Ahead was the silhouette of a tall man in a gray suit, holding a toddler in his arms. "Dad?" Malik whispered, stepping forward. The man turned his head. His face was blurred, but his eyes tired. Smoky gray looked straight through him. And then he vanished into the fog. Malik jolted awake, heart pounding. A fierce need surged inside him. He had to know. He had to know who his father really was. Why so much had been hidden. After an awkward breakfast with Elliot's family, Malik returned once again to the library. The ceiling light cast a faint golden glow on the large portrait of a young Elliot, his gaze distant, hiding something behind that polished smile. Malik scanned the room. At the far end of the bookshelf, he noticed something he hadn't before. A small oak door, dusty and half hidden behind a shelf. The iron latch was rusted. When Malik turned the handle, it clicked. It wasn't locked. The door creaked open, as if it had been waiting for him all these years. The room inside was barely 12 square meters. No lights, only a sliver of sunlight streaming through a tiny window, just enough to reveal faded curtains, some old furniture, and a desk piled with documents. No one had been in here for a long time. In one corner was a wooden cabinet. On the desk lay a bundle of files tied with a leather strap. On top was a faded label. Daniel Hawthorne, Separation Case 1994. Malik stopped breathing. He opened the file. The first page was a portrait of a young, strong Daniel, his eyes strikingly similar to Malik's. Next to it was a copy of a court decision. Mr. Daniel Hawthorne relinquishes parental rights to a child born from an extramarital relationship with a black woman named Rosa. Malik was stunned. His head rang like a bomb had just exploded. Rosa! The woman who raised me. That's my birth mother. Beneath the file was a brown leather notebook, the edges yellowed by time. The first page contained only a few trembling lines, clearly written with emotion. Malik, if you're reading this, then I'm probably no longer here, but blood is something no one can deny. I was wrong. Out of fear, pressure, and being stripped of my right to be a father. But every night I dream of you. I dream of you calling me Dad, and all I ever hope is that one day you'll find the way back. Malik clutched the notebook, his eyes burning. Scattered memories of childhood, warm arms holding him, soft lullabies in the dark, suddenly came alive again, like a film re-illuminated by truth. Upstairs in a wood-paneled office, Margaret, Elliot's sister, sat by the window, a cold cup of tea in her hand. Across from her sat Preston, Elliot's ambitious grandson. Margaret frowned. If that boy really is Elliot's grandson, the entire inheritance shifts. He cannot be recognized. Preston narrowed his eyes. I hired a private investigator. There are ways to trap him in legal trouble. One theft, one accident, one minor charge. That's all it takes to eliminate him. Margaret took a slow sip of her tea. Do it, quickly, before Elliot grows too soft. Malik stood alone in the dark room. In one hand, he held his father's notebook. In the other, a photo of young Rosa and Daniel, locked in a stolen moment of happiness. Behind him, the faint light through the window cast his shadow long and narrow, as if the past was clinging tightly to the present. The lost grandson of Elliot, the son of Daniel, the child once denied, has now returned. Inside the vast walnut-paneled room, with towering bookshelves and windows overlooking the pine forest, where Elliot often came each afternoon to read and sip scotch, silence hung so heavily that the ticking of the antique clock echoed like thunder. Malik stood in front of him, holding an old worn leather notebook with faded writing blurred by both tears and time. Inside were the final journal entries of Daniel, his biological father and Elliot's lost son. Malik's voice was low but firm. You knew who I was the moment you saw this notebook, didn't you? Elliot slowly looked up. In his aged eyes was a storm that had been silent for far too long. Yes, I knew. Malik was not surprised, but he was hurt. Then why? Malik asked. Why didn't you come find me? Why did you let me grow up in poverty without anyone to protect me? Elliot walked over to the window, gazing into the misty forest beyond. His fingers gripped the windowsill so tightly they turned white. "Because I was afraid," he said, his voice cracking. "Because I let Daniel die without getting the chance to say I'm sorry, and I didn't have the strength to face what came after my failure." Elsewhere in a discreet room on the east wing of the estate, Margaret, Daniel's sister and Malik's aunt, sat at a small meeting table with two private attorneys. Her face was cold, her silver hair perfectly pinned, her eyes sharp as razors. "I want to activate Clause 13B in the will," she said. "Anyone without verified legal bloodline is not entitled to inheritance." One of the lawyers looked uneasy. "But if the boy really is a direct descendant, this clause won't hold morally." Margaret gave him a piercing look. "We're not talking about morals. We're talking about power and money." Elliot personally arranged for Malik to meet with one of the top genetic specialists at the family's private hospital. The laboratory was sterile white, reeking of antiseptic. When the needle pierced his arm, Malik didn't flinch. But inside, he was a storm. What if it's not true? What if everything I believed wasn't real? But he remembered the details in the notebook, the trembling handwriting of his late father, the faded photos of Daniel holding a baby. He had seen those eyes before in his own reflection. 2 days later, a theft was reported. A white gold wristwatch, custom-made for the founder of the Hawthorne Empire, had gone missing from the family's heritage vault, a place accessible to only a select few. Margaret immediately called for an emergency family meeting. There she presented a grainy video showing Malik coincidentally passing through the corridor just as the security system malfunctioned. Her voice was laced with false innocence. "I'm not saying he stole it, but the timing is convenient." Malik stood, eyes bloodshot. "If you want me gone, say it straight." His voice was sharp. "I don't need this family's money. I only want to know who I am." Margaret replied calmly, "Exactly. And I want to know too. Are you a long-lost grandson or a cunning storyteller?" That night, the rain poured relentlessly. Malik stood outside the estate's grand iron gates, a small suitcase in hand. His hair was soaked, shoes muddy, but his head was held high. Elliot stood under the portico, watching his grandson through the downpour, his hands trembling as they clutched the railing. "Malik, please give me more time," he pleaded. Malik didn't turn around. "It's not time you lack," he said. "It's courage." He walked away into the night. His small figure disappeared into the darkness. But Elliot knew he was walking toward becoming someone greater than anyone in the Hawthorne family. Malik returned to the slums where he had grown up. But this time, he came back with a mission. "If they don't want me at their table, I'll build my own, and I'll invite others like me to sit with pride." On a gray morning, sunlight filtered faintly through the large glass window of a modern laboratory. Malik sat on a cold, metal chair. Head bowed, hands clenched. Though his face remained composed, the small muscles around his eyes were taut with anxiety. The door opened. A tall, lean doctor wearing glasses entered, carrying a sealed envelope. He said nothing, only handed the envelope to Malik with eyes full of sympathy. Malik stared at the printed name. Malik Carter tested against Elliot Hawthorne. His heart pounded in his ears. He slowly opened the envelope, his hands trembling. When his eyes reached the final line, printed in bold, he stopped breathing. Result: DNA analysis confirms 99.998% direct blood relation. Malik couldn't speak, not because of the near-perfect percentage, but because of the tidal wave of emotions crashing over him: pain, anger, joy, and a strange emptiness. He stood, nodded in thanks, and walked out with eyes that had changed. He was no longer the nameless boy from the streets. He was now the confirmed bloodline of an empire. Sitting in a small cafe near the train station, Malik held his phone in one hand, staring out at the misty drizzle. The call connected. Margaret's voice came through, cold and sharp. "Why are you calling me?" Malik spoke calmly. "Just wanted to let you know, the game is over. I have the test results. I am Elliot's legitimate grandson." Silence stretched thick over the line. Margaret's tone turned harsh. "You think a few sheets of paper will make me believe you? Or make this company accept some street rat?" Malik responded, "No. But it'll make the courts, the press, and the board of directors start asking questions. He continued, I don't need your affection. I need the truth to be respected. You have 48 hours to step down with dignity. After that, I can't guarantee you'll walk away with any face left. He hung up. He didn't wait for a reply. He knew there was nothing left to negotiate. That night, Elliot sat alone in his private library, surrounded by old books and faded keepsakes. He pulled open a drawer and took out a wooden box. Inside were unsent letters. One bore a trembling inscription, To Daniel, if I never get the chance to say I'm sorry. Elliot gently touched the letter, his aged eyes misting. Daniel, I lost you, but maybe I haven't lost everyone. For the first time in years, there was a flicker of hope in his gaze. The shareholders' meeting took place at the top floor of the Hawthorne Tower, a glass and steel monument of wealth, as cold and polished as the world it represented. Margaret entered as always, powerful and proud. But this time, a new figure stepped forward. Malik. Dressed in a sleek black suit, his eyes sharp, his presence commanding. Elliot stood in the middle of the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Malik Carter, my grandson, the direct heir of Daniel Hawthorne. The room erupted in murmurs. Some gasped, others stared in disbelief. Elliot raised his voice. And starting today, I am transferring my entire shareholding to Malik, because no one deserves it more than the boy who helped me on a road. Not for money, not for gain, but out of pure kindness. Margaret stood abruptly. Elliot, you're insane. Handing everything to some kid with no background? Elliot lifted the DNA test report and held it high. This is the evidence. Malik is not just some kid. He is my blood. And all of you should ask yourselves, who has truly been deceiving this empire? Malik's story spread like wildfire across every news outlet. CNN ran the headline, Street boy fixes flat tire for stranger turns out to be billionaire's lost heir. On Twitter, trends emerged, from the streets to the skyscraper, just justice for Malik, just blood doesn't lie. The internet split in two. Supporters hailed Malik as a symbol of justice and triumph. Critics whispered about manipulation and opportunism. Somewhere in the shadows, Margaret was already planning her next move. Malik had claimed the truth. He had stepped onto the grand stage, not to receive applause, but to rewrite the rules. Yet deep down, he knew this first victory was not the final one. Margaret still held cards, and the darkness within the Hawthorne legacy ran deeper than he imagined. 2 days after the shocking shareholders' meeting, Malik returned to the Hawthorne estate, now feeling more like a living museum of both legends and regrets. While Elliot was resting after a brief spell of faintness, the elderly butler, Francis, approached Malik quietly. Francis spoke in a solemn tone. Young master, there's something I believe it's time you see. He handed Malik an old wooden box wrapped in aged goatskin leather. Inside was a stack of handwritten letters, yellowed by time, sealed with the insignia of Daniel Hawthorne, the father Malik had never known. Malik sat in Elliot's office, the amber light casting tense shadows across his face as he opened the first letter. My son, if you are reading this, it means I no longer have the chance to tell you in person that I never abandoned you. I was forced away from your mother. Your grandmother, Margaret, never accepted a love that didn't fit the mold. She had me sent to Europe, cut all my communication. By the time I learned you had been born, every door had already been closed. Malik's hands shook as he gripped the letter. Daniel's words continued, If you carry this blood, you have every right to stand inside that empire. But don't let it consume you. Change it, because the only way to correct my mistakes is through the truth. Elsewhere, in a private underground office, Margaret, the woman who once held unchecked power, was leading a closed-door meeting with her legal team and media strategists. Her voice was cold and resolute. Call the press. Issue a statement that I was forced out of the board under pressure. She looked at her assistant. And release Malik's old school records, especially the part where he dropped out of high school. One advisor hesitated. But that might... Margaret cut him off. I didn't ask for a moral review. I asked for a takedown. Within 24 hours, the media was ablaze. One article went viral. From empire heir to high school dropout Hawthorne in crisis? Malik opened his phone to a flood of messages, interview requests, false reports, and wild conspiracy theories. In a private meeting with senior executives, Elliot called for an emergency board session. He stood, gripping his wooden cane, his eyes sharper than ever. I entrusted this legacy to the one who earned it, and if any of you are involved in this smear campaign against my grandson, step forward now. If not, know that I will hold each of you accountable. No one dared to speak. That evening, Malik visited Clara, the woman he had always known as his mother, the one who raised him with nothing but her bare hands and quiet strength. Her modest apartment stood in stark contrast to the glittering world of the Hawthorns, but it radiated a warmth he hadn't felt in days. Malik's voice trembled. "Why didn't you ever tell me I was Daniel Hawthorne's son?" Clara poured tea, her gaze distant. "I tried, but they paid me, threatened me. I didn't want you to grow up with hatred in your heart. But now, maybe it's time you knew. They tried to erase both of us from that family's history." Malik embraced her tightly. His voice was a whisper. "They were wrong because they couldn't erase me from its future." Malik invited an acclaimed investigative journalist known for exposing corrupt CEOs to tell his full story. That night, the video titled "The Street Kid and the Truth Behind the Hawthorne Empire" reached over 10 million views. In the interview, Malik made no excuses. He said, "I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I've slept on park benches. But I never begged a soul. I helped a stranger because it was the right thing to do. And I stand here today, not because of the Hawthorne name, but because the truth needed someone to stand up for it." Margaret was backed into a corner. Elliot launched a deep audit into past transactions and uncovered several shady contracts she had signed under the company's name. Malik now understood. True power wasn't just about bloodlines. It was about daring to confront, to heal, and to rebuild the broken legacy you inherit. 5 years passed. The city had changed. A sleek, modern community center stood where a decaying slum once did, its name carved into the stone archway, the Carter Legacy Center. Malik, now CEO of Hawthorne Industries, was more commonly known as the man in canvas shoes, because he still wore his old Converse sneakers from the day he fixed a flat tire, even in board meetings. He didn't live in a penthouse or drive luxury cars. Every morning he walked from his modest apartment to the office. Coffee in hand, always smiling at the people around him, CNN aired a special feature. From a boy fixing cars on the roadside to the head of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, what makes Malik Carter remarkable isn't the wealth he commands, but how he chooses to give it away. The footage replayed scenes from the opening of his free academy for underprivileged Black youth. Its slogan read, "If I can, so can you. But only if someone believes in you enough to give you that first chance." One evening, as Malik tidied up his office, a knock came at the door. A man stood there around 30, red-haired, his expression cautious. "Excuse me, I'm Lucas Hawthorne, and I think I might be your cousin." Malik froze. "I'm the illegitimate son of Charles, Daniel's younger brother." Lucas handed him a letter, written in Daniel's familiar handwriting, addressed to Charles's youngest child, and hidden for years by Margaret. It read, "If one day Charles's son comes looking, give him the chance our family never gave his father." Malik didn't turn Lucas away. He didn't question him. He invited him in, poured tea, and listened to his story. "I'm not here to claim inheritance," Lucas said softly. "I just want to know if I truly have family." Malik looked at the younger man and saw a version of himself from 5 years ago. "I was given a chance I didn't believe I deserved. Now it's my turn to give one." The next morning, two men, one who had once been a forgotten street kid, the other the hidden son of a broken lineage, walked out of the Hawthorne Tower side by side. Behind them, the building's signage had been changed. It now read, "Hawthorne and Carter Foundation." A legacy is not built on wealth, but on the heart that leaves it behind. Malik Carter was no longer just a CEO. He had become a symbol of a new generation, one that believed power was not for ruling, but for empowering. The boy once looked down upon on a dusty road had become the man laying down a path for thousands to rise. And the most extraordinary thing was, it had all started with a flat tire and an act of kindness. Malik Carter was no longer a name whispered in doubt. He was now written in bold on building plaques, quoted in classrooms, and carried with pride in the hearts of young dreamers. His rise had not been clean or easy, but it had been real. With every challenge, he had chosen transparency over performance, dignity over ego, and most of all, people over power. What made his leadership remarkable was not just that he had inherited a legacy, but that he had rewritten what it meant. In a televised town hall, Malik stood before a crowd of high school students. One of them, a boy no older than 14 with nervous eyes, asked, "Mr. Carter, do you think someone like me could become someone like you?" Malik smiled, the same quiet, confident smile he had the day he fixed a stranger's tire. "You already are. You just haven't seen it yet. You don't need my shoes. You need your own path. But I'll help you walk it if you let me." Behind the scenes, Preston, once positioned as the heir of Hawthorne, watched from afar. His fall from grace had been swift after evidence surfaced of his role in the sabotage and theft scandal. Margaret had quietly left the board. Her final statement to the press was a single line: "Some legacies are better left behind." But Malik never spoke ill of her. In private, he once said to Rosa, "Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's knowing you don't need vengeance to feel whole." Years later, as Malik stood in front of the original Hawthorne estate, now transformed into a leadership institute for underserved youth, he placed his hand on the stone arch and closed his eyes. Daniel's face flashed in his memory, Clara's steady hands, Rosa's firm voice, and Elliot's final words before passing. "You didn't just save me on that road, Malik. You saved this family from itself." A reporter once asked Malik what he thought his story meant. He replied, "It's not about where I came from. It's about what I chose to do when given a chance. I think everyone deserves one." And so, the boy who had been denied a name became the man who gave others a future. And all of it began with a single ordinary act of kindness on a scorching road no one else wanted to travel.